Welcome to Kubernetes SIG Architecture for June 20th, 2019. You can get to the agenda at bit.ly/SIG-architecture. And I'll drop it into chat here for anybody who just wants a quick link. And so we've got a few agenda items for today. The first one is API Snoop. Hey, Piak, are you online? I think that's you to talk about it.
That is me.
Well, then the floor is yours.
Awesome. I have some slides, but I am also starting my vacation today in beautiful, warm Samoa. Welcome to the ocean. So I have Zach is online. He's going to be remotely pushing those slides and screens forward. Thank you for that, Zach. We've had a few questions around what conformance looks like and how far we're coming and where we can go. And that's part of what we've been doing with API Snoop and the crew over at II Co-op. We'll go through some of the questions we came up with and some of the answers and in particular directions that we came up with. But I'm really interested in see what other questions that are meaningful to us that we can use looking at how we're actually using our API to drive what conformance and what our tests look like. So on our first question is just which APIs are conformant? API Snoop links from the top are persistent, so when you click on any of these links, they'll come up and you can change your zoom level, click on whether you've got tested, untested, or conformance, and most of these links are based around that simplicity. But if we knew which APIs are conformant, we would see that there's I think there's 96. There you go. So we have 96 existing conformant endpoints. And all conformant endpoints are, I focused on what was unstable, because sometimes there are conformance tests that hit things that aren't stable. But these are the 96 conformance stable endpoints. That gives us a base for where we are. But what if we knew what stable core APIs were already being tested, but we haven't yet tagged those tests as conformance? The next slide shows that we have 30. These are core, stable core endpoints that if you look at the checkboxes there, this is untested and not conformant tested, but tested. That's 30 endpoints there. If we take that list, and we can see on the next slide that with those 96 tests and 36 core APIs that we could promote, if they're promote worthy, we would get a 16 if we got half of them, and up to a 31% increase in stable API coverage. I think that's nice. That's a nice start. If we go a bit further beyond just stable core and said, let's expand this, what if we knew about stable everything APIs, which already have tests written, but are not yet promoted to conformance? The number's a bit higher. The number's, I think, 50 something, 51 endpoints. So we could look at the existing test hitting 51 endpoints and promote those to conformance if they're promotion worthy. And that would give us a total on the next slide of 90, that's 140. Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice. That'd give us, even if we only got half of those promoted, that would give us a 25% increase, 26% increase in stable API coverage, and up to a 50% increase. So I think that's quite nice. That's just one question that could result in prioritizing and moving our testing and conformance infrastructure forward. One of the other questions we came up with that seemed meaningful on the next slide was, there's our 147 endpoints, yeah. What if we knew which stable APIs were being hit but not tested? And these are stable APIs that during the course of our release blocking job, they are hit in some way by some application other than directly by our E2E tests. And if we look at the results of that, we can see that there are 95 endpoints that are being hit. So if we were to look into the patterns of behavior of those things hitting those endpoints, we would know which applications they were that are part of core Kubernetes. They're part of the SIG release blocking job, that we could put some low-hanging fruit on writing some decent tests to cover those things. The next question we came up with was, what if we knew and so part of the output of these actions was to create umbrella slides. So each of these questions, we've created an umbrella issue, and under each of these umbrella issues, we have listed either all of the tests that we believe are they may not be straight promotable, but they do point out the list. And so we're going to go through and triage that list and help with the community's help figure out which ones are valid for promotion. And that was for the first slide, our first set. And this one is our list of stable API endpoints. Again, we've got 3 of these different umbrella tickets for these big 3 questions. Next slide. The last one was, what if we knew which untested APIs were not being hit by just anything, but being hit by kube star, so anything in the Kubernetes core that's hitting the API server itself. And I believe that's, how many is that? Let's see, 125 endpoints. So these 125 endpoints are being hit directly by kube API server, kube controller manager, kube scheduler, and kube proxy. You can just put a regex into that field and it'll match against which user agents are hitting the different endpoints. Again, we could go back through this list of untested stable API endpoints hit by core, and I've grouped these together by which core component is hitting it with the help of Devin. And it might be useful to go and look at this list. It's just a question, we came up with an answer, but there's probably other interesting questions that this group has that we could look at. And that's where we're at now on the next slide. Yep, there we are. With your feedback, I'd love to make API Snoop the best tool for identifying and prioritizing untested behaviors, but we need to be asking the right questions. And I want to make sure that we're on track in asking and answering the right questions. Devin is working with our team. He's over in the States, I believe up in Portland. Zach is the one presenting the slides for me. He's usually down in Wellington, New Zealand, and Stephen is up in the North Island with me in the beautiful Bay of Plenty. And that's all due to the work of my team. And here's how you can get a hold of us. Now that we've done our own Q&A session, I'd love to open up the floor for a Q&A with SIG Arch.
Was this already presented to the conformance subproject?
This was presented somewhat without the answers to the conformance there at Barcelona. But we went through and answered the questions as well, because that was the output of Tim had asked us to create the umbrella tickets.
I have seen pieces of this content at the conformance presentation at KubeCon EU, and hippies sort of presented some of the GitHub issues that they were planning on working against at the conformance meeting, though not to these slides specifically. And my understanding is this is what will be presented at Shanghai.
Yep, this is Shanghai.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering more about the regular GVCs than KubeCon, because not everybody could attend the KubeCon EU.
Yes, we saw pieces of it, and we're working through pieces of it currently. We have, as mentioned in the document, I just added the note, is that we're going to groom the backlog with fun rainbows and kittens this afternoon, if you're so inclined to join. And we will walk through the gory details of what it would mean to implement or to promote some of those APIs that Hippie had denoted.
Yeah, I think the big questions we walked away with was if we still care about prioritizing pod behavior specifically, like which of these are most relevant within that context. And then for some of the existing tests that exercise these endpoints, do they do so in a direct manner or a completely Rube Goldbergian accidental manner? And,
wow.
and
yeah,
so
and also a lot of these behaviors are, at least ones that I'm looking at are optional behaviors. So far we don't cover those In conformance, like I don't know that all providers support Gluster, and certainly not all support network policy enforcement. RBAC is even optional. So we would need to go through and figure out what we want to do about those kinds of things. Storage in particular has a number of special issues that we need to figure out before we can cover most aspects of storage in conformance.
I noticed that within storage in particular that the way that the framework is written, if we were to use a different storage driver, it depends on which cloud you're running it on. Those tests automatically get tagged with a bunch of it's the same set of tests run against different drivers. And so the reason it's called Gluster in that list is because this test was run against the Google Cloud. If we were to run this same exact test suite against a different cloud provider, the test name would be different.
Right. I mean, we need to look at what storage behaviors are widely supported and abstract away the individual provider using TDP and storage class or something like that. So there was a proposal from SIG Storage a while back that we should go back and revisit probably if we want to address the storage ones.
Yeah, we went through a number of these things yesterday too, and in Barcelona, like was mentioned, and I think there's a substantial amount of work that can be done here to move things forward based on this data. I think longer run we have some other tooling and things that we're working on, but that's where we're make some real progress right away.
Yeah, and to go back to Aaron's point about pod, and the reason we were focusing on pod is because that is the core of the system. It's also the case that the kubelet is highly pluggable as CRI, CSI, CNI, and people are even swapping out the kubelets with alternate implementations. So in general, with conformance, since there is so many untested areas, I felt it was important to focus on areas that are more likely to be non-conformant, which is areas that are highly pluggable and or have proven alternate implementations in the ecosystem, like kubeproxy or there are a couple of instances of the scheduler, but certainly kubelet and etcd are ones that are coming up more frequently these days. K3s used SQLite or something like that and passed all the conformance tests. So we need to really figure out what etcd dependent behaviors in the API server we should be validating. So as opposed to just looking at all the surface area, yeah, if there's low-hanging fruit, we should cover that. But for non-low-hanging fruit, I think we need to prioritize the areas where not everybody is just going to all use the same implementation and the risk of non-conformance is low.
Yeah, I feel like this is why the suggestion would be to get this low-hanging fruit out of the way, while sort of in parallel we work with sort of the framework that John has laid out in his CAP around. Could we create a machine parsable list of behaviors that are expected, so we can have folks such as yourself, Brian, or who are more technically inclined, like enumerate what are all of the behaviors that we care to actually validate, and separate the review of that from whether or not tests are adequately exercising those behaviors, so that we can then start to check off the list, like whether or not we've done that. And the behaviors of some of these APIs can be included in that list.
Yeah, just as one example of maybe something that's less obvious, just by looking at the APIs that are called, is do we have a test that tests whether a pod on one node can actually communicate with a pod on another node, right? Which would verify that pod networking is working to some degree. It's not, I don't think we have an explicit test for that.
I know we have a test for that. I don't know if it's
do you ensure that the pods are on different nodes?
I believe we do. Sorry, guys, I was hanging out off camera. I'm pretty sure that we made that assurance by looking at it, but I'd have to go back and look. But I do remember writing this test because
I know that we didn't. The issue that you must have multiple nodes to pass conformance only recently came up because of a daemon set for a different test. So I know if there was a networking test before that it did not ensure that the pods were on different nodes because it was not required, and we had single node providers pass conformance.
Okay. It could be true.
And so I think you're doing a good job of like enumerating the list of behaviors that we can't actually enumerate with a machine that looks solely at the API or the fields, the API endpoints or the fields within the endpoints. Our hope is like we could start to proactively generate such an exhaustive list, but we also really will need human curation of the same list of behaviors that cannot be adequately machine generated. And so it's about how do we, lock people in a room and get them to come up with that list, but make sure that list is expressed in a machine consumable way so we can actually see it checked off. Historically, that's only ever been like a spreadsheet and then humans maintain it, right?
Right. Yeah, I was hoping that individual SIGs could propose those core behaviors for their specific technical areas, right? Like SIG network should know what theirs are, SIG node should know what theirs are, SIG storage should know what theirs are, et cetera.
I know we struggle as a community, just as long as I have everyone here, to have that carrot and stick philosophy. Like what are the incentives and what are the repercussions? But a potential repercussion could be the denial of promotion for features from SIG Arch until certain things have been tested by said SIG.
Well, I think in this particular case, and yes, we could do something like that, but I mean, for the most part, we're trying to distribute authority, train API reviewers and all the individual SIGs and things like that. I actually just think a coordinated push, say, look, our goal for the next release is to at least enumerate those core behaviors. Our goal for the next couple of releases after that are to ensure we have tests for some fractions. I actually think it's more of just a program management kind of gap that no one's actually driving it, so no one's actually aligned on doing something about it. So
I don't think we'll get a lot of resistance from folks. I mean, nobody likes extra work, but if somebody's driving it and makes it a priority, I think it'll move forward.
Yeah, like just I asked some folks in API machinery for some watch tests. They produced a watch test, and it just requires people to push and to drive it and to make it clear that it's important, and people will generally work on it. If that doesn't happen, then we can figure out what to do next. But without a driver, even with a stick, I don't think it will really happen. So.
Yeah, and I can take that role and drive those things forward and try to move it forward as we build out the machine readable format and we understand it. Then we'll have something specific to ask for.
Yeah, I think we can start with a half a dozen SIGs, and that will cover most of the core areas in the core API surface, and work with them. Node, storage, network, API machinery, scheduling, and I don't know, auto scaling or something like that. And auth, if we want to do auth, the problem with auth is that everything is pluggable and optional. So I would put them lower down the list.
Then I can support you in that role too.
Yeah, so,
Thank you.
We were on the next questions we were hoping might help us revolve around looking at the parameters used, like iterating through node, and using some of the existing frameworks by some of the community members that we have for knowing which APIs or which parameters are being called, so we can start to record not just the parameters but the behaviors as well.
Talk about the individual fields.
The field.
The resources. Yeah.
If we start to see sequences of the fields in use, as you see the return parameters, we can start to say, well, this is a common behavior. But focusing on some used in node.
I would be worried that there's like diminishing returns the deeper we go. I mean, at some point we can identify sort of key parameters that we want to make sure that we see variability in testing on, and versus trying to do something automagic. I mean, things like you know, type equals load balancer versus type equals, you know, cluster IP on service, right? Like there's going to be a couple that are going to be absolutely critical that we want to see diversity on, but yeah. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, so at the first level, we don't even know that we have tests that deliberately exercise many of the fields in the API, and in PodSpec in particular, at least for the ones that meet the requirements in terms of their like OS agnostic and things like that. Well, there's still going to be Linux for the most part, but in any case, yeah, we don't really have any sense of ranges of values that are tested at the moment. I would defer that for the most part for now until we actually have it, you know, to make sure that we have tested post-start hooks and liveness probes and, you know, all of the feature surface, the testable feature surface of pod, at least in some configuration intentionally. Because of the way the tests are constructed, there are some common test fixtures where it says create me a pod, and there's a standard boilerplate pod, and many of the tests won't actually validate all of the features that are configured in that pod. They'll just be incidental. So that we may need to actually do some work on the tests to use more minimal test fixtures so that we can more easily identify tests that are intentionally testing features versus accidentally configuring them.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like we've gone far afield of what the original thing was here, and most of this discussion would be more productively held in the conformance meeting or at the prioritization meeting later today.
That sounds good.
This was a good check-in of like one of the plans, but we got other stuff on the agenda.
Can I ask one quick thing here? There was the presentation early on. Can you add that to the agenda and notes so we can reference back to it later?
Sure.
Thank you.
We will do.
Okay, we can move on to the next thing here, which is from somebody who couldn't make it today, which looks like a request to integrate issue triage into the meetings, or a question on it. The text here says, there's been a small issue triage call for a few weeks. It's at 7:30 a.m. Pacific time. Workload is now very low. Maybe better serve 5 to 15-minute checkups from more SIG members.
Hi, I've been running this. I don't know exactly who added this to the meeting agenda, but yeah, it's been going okay. We've been going through the incoming issues. We've been going through some older issues and pinging people and trying to see what can be closed and what can be moved to the other sub-projects and things like that. So the incoming queue is not really huge. It's just the backlog that we have is a lot. Go ahead, Brian.
So two thoughts. One is, if the load is low, I might fold it into the sub-project meetings instead, or for things that are not yet categorized by sub-project, just cover that before or after the sub-project check-ins to sort that out, to route to the correct sub-project. In terms of pinging old issues, if that's just pinging via GitHub, that's not very effective because for two reasons. One, GitHub notifications are worthless, but also usually the wrong people are subscribed to the old issues, right? Like if it's an issue that's a couple of years old, probably there are different people who are working in that area of the project now, and they are not subscribed to the issue. There's no manageable team subscription mechanism in GitHub where we can curate the set of people who are currently received. Like, I think the teams are expanded at the point that they're added or some weird thing. Anyway, it's totally broken. It doesn't work. So I would say we need a different mechanism for getting attention to those older issues, either by like a summary email to the relevant SIGs or something. But yeah, I'm not aware of a good management mechanism. Everything we've tried in the past has more or less failed.
Yep, for sure. So what do you want to do going next? Should I shut down that meeting and make sure that the folks come here? There's like 4-5 people, who come to this meeting every week.
Or at least make sure that someone from that group or one or two people are represented from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll
Like
make sure that
or something.
Folks like Valerie show up here and give an update. Okay,
Cool.
Thank you.
All right. That one was easy enough. The next one is actually a check-in on the CRD work. So a while ago, we had a number of CRD discussions, particularly around doing some of the stuff with core stuff, and it came up as an idea, do we do something maybe even birds of a featherish, where a group goes off and just syncs up and checks in on that work, so we can make sure that things are moving along, people are unblocked, things of that nature?
What is the motivation?
The motivation was in part, we've taken a number of actions as a group to send things off and get them done throughout these meetings we've had, and quite often we don't come back to follow up to see what happened with those actions, to make sure they happened, things of that nature. And I think it was Jace who suggested this. Dims may be able to correct me. In going and starting to follow up, and this was the item that he came up with.
Matt, this is Derek, and I think
Derek,
it was
yeah, you can probably do it better than me too.
Who had suggested a follow-up on this, and I don't know if Jace is here to speak to it. I think my recollection of the conversation was two parts. One, if there was a statement or directional intent, thinking back to other APIs like node lease and runtime class and other things that may have tried to start building via CRDs that could not be built via CRDs out of the core. And if there was a change in position on that, or if CRDs were going to be looking to be able to enable that. I think within the group here, in that conversation that was happening, I think there was some confusion on if CRDs were intended to be ever scoped more granularly within a cluster. I think SIG API machinery had made some statements intending that that was not going to be the case, but I think not to speak for Jace, but I feel like Jace was just wanting to see if there was any updates to when and how CRDs should be used, both in core and out of core, and maybe getting SIG API machinery to give an update.
I see.
I stated that fairly.
And there was one subgroup from SIG Arch that spun off to investigate installation of CRDs, and I don't know that we ever got closure on what was happening there. So that one specific thing we should definitely follow up on in SIG Arch. If we had a volunteer to go to API machinery to find out what the roadmap for CRD GA is, I think someone could just give a brief update to this group, or we could ask them to give an update. But I think they were still, last I heard, they were still trying to finalize the criteria for GA for CRDs. And obviously there has been work in progress on conversion, which is one of the clear requirements. But I'm not sure if they have a crisp set of criteria yet.
So it's on our list for after Daniel gets back from leave.
Just to give a brief update, the proposal that we originally worked on ad hoc between myself, Mr. Hawkins to your right, and Justin Santa Barbara and other folks was that we didn't like any of the proposals pretty much, but add-ons was the one we disliked the least. And the add-on sub-project has been started. They're starting with some core things. They want to get to an initial sort of alpha-ish grade style release, potentially in the 1.16 timeframe, but they're not, I think, mature enough to handle main CRD installation at this time. We're starting very simple with things like kubeproxy and core DNS.
Yeah, as I recall, that was one of the main blockers for a couple of the use cases. Lease had some additional blockers, which I don't think are going to be addressed even in the GA of CRD. But you know, for controllers that just need something to be installed by default in every cluster, that was perceived as the, other than GA of CRDs themselves, the main blocking issue for use within the project.
If we want to keep putting pressure on teams to use CRD instead of built-ins, we do need to address this.
Yeah.
I got a sneak peek of the keynote for Shanghai KubeCon, and we're called out in that.
So I don't know how this is a project management question. There's not a lot of people working on add-ons currently. There's a very small strike force. If this is super important for large scale things, I do think we need more resources and mind share working on this problem in order for us to actually address it in a reasonable time frame.
Yes, I don't know for this topic, Tim, if the scope was really related to add-ons versus can things built in the core use CRDs by default or not. And so they're probably distinct topics, but maybe I see David chimed in with something in the chat. I don't know if you want to speak with David. I thought I heard you
We've
earlier.
been putting together a list. We had actually merged one this past spring of things we knew we needed for GA. We did, as I recall it, specifically exclude trying to build core APIs as a requirement for GA. And installation, we weren't opinionated on because it wasn't core APIs.
You're on mute, Mr. Hawkins. We can't hear you.
Sorry, folks like storage are counting on us to eventually answer this before they can go GA. So maybe there's a disconnect here. If we don't think that having an add-on or CRD loading solution is in scope for CRD GA, maybe we should not be pushing that agenda.
Yep.
Like, I don't really want to go back to the storage folks because they have a really nice keynote speech about how wonderful it is to actually live in CRD land. And I don't want to go back and tell them that they should undo all that. I'm pretty sure they'll kill me. Rock in a hard place here.
Yeah, I see a distinction between, does the API function in a way where it can be used? Is it reliable enough to be used by external pieces, including things like versioning? And I see a distinction between that and being able to actually create the resource.
Sure, and I don't mean to imply that it's necessarily the CRD or API machinery team's problem to figure out how to load these things, but it seems like left, right, and center are not on the same page with respect to this.
Well, we could, I guess, change the advice about how to install CRDs for built-in things to just programmatically create it like we do for the default namespace and things like that.
We could. That was evaluated as one of the options that we didn't like.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the options that we didn't like, but it was one of the ones we liked even less.
And it reduces flexibility,
Yeah.
but you would also have less flexibility if it were built in.
True. We have interesting version skew and HA issues if you have multiple, like which component is responsible for dealing with this, right?
Yes. But
so
the same is true for built-in types.
I guess that's true.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe Tim, we should go back and revisit that and figure out if there's actually a 2019 scoped time frame for a real solution, or whether we should actually give guidance to build it in deeper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's easier to change the installation mechanism than to flip between built-in types and CRDs.
I agree. I'm not even kidding. I'm pretty sure they'll string me up.
Yeah.
Come back and tell them you were wrong.
Yeah. So that's what I would advise.
Just
sorry,
for those, yeah, I'm sorry. Just to refresh those in the code who might not have been in the past discussion, when we talk about the pain points of installing a CRD, can we be maybe a little precise on what the pain is. Obviously, CRDs are extremely popular in the wild today.
Yes, sorry. The pain point here is if we consider that a CRD is really part of built-in Kubernetes, but it's implemented as a CRD, who is responsible for loading that CRD and upgrading that CRD and making sure that it continues to be loaded so that other components can depend on it?
It's a chicken egg problem with bootstrapping.
Right. So my understanding on the add-on sub-project was that that is an optional component. And so is that a inaccurate understanding?
Well, the proposal we created around CRDs was that that was the least disliked option as a potential mechanism. I don't have strong opinions. I just know that we kind of left the CRD lifecycle question hanging.
Yeah.
So I don't.
I'll take a note now here to go back and revisit that. Frankly, the doc got closed at some point and it fell off my stack. And so I will take a specific action to revisit that and poke the doc and see if we can get some conclusion.
Okay, that'd be great, Tim. It'd probably be good if we think that these are required APIs, but they're built with CRDs, that they're not installed by an optional component.
Agreed.
All right.
So, I mean, it seems like there's two issues here, though, just to be clear, because we talked about a couple of things. Number one is like add-ons for CRDs. The other one was finer grained scopes for CRDs, essentially sort of namespace relative CRDs that was mentioned earlier. These are separate, right?
And the other is just GA for CRDs.
Yeah, just what is, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because I would love to see the namespace, but that definitely seems like that's further out, more speculative than
yeah, that just changed the whole model of what CRDs are for. So
I got ideas, but it's
yes,
different topic.
There was a mailing list thread on dealing with CRDs, especially when you get into some of the way some of the applications are using it, right? You might have two different people who are installing the same CRDs and maybe different controllers working on the same CRD in two different namespaces who don't know about each other. We have that as a real world problem in the wild today. And so how do you deal with things like updates, right? When you've got different controllers querying for different versions of different things, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the dependency management?
I wrote this up at some point, like we've basically recreated the same problem that containers were invented to solve.
Yeah, so that discussion we should really have in API machinery.
Yes. And so I don't think that's solved here, but the whole namespace and getting into that's why it's coming up, and that conversation probably needs to be had, but it's probably separate from getting the existing CRDs to GA.
I will say, in terms of having that discussion, I would like to see someone come forward with not just a problem statement, but an idea for how they think it could actually functionally be solved. We haven't chosen to leave it off of our roadmap by accident.
Yes.
And we are looking for not just, hey, I really wish you could do that.
Yeah. So I would suggest SIG Arch focus on the topic of what is our guidance about using CRDs for functionality built into Kubernetes one way or another, and API machinery focus on the CRD mechanism itself.
Okay. Sounds good. Anything else on that? Fantastic. Then we are now into sub-project updates. We start off, we got API reviews. Jordan, are you on?
He's out this week. I hope he's good.
He's actually on vacation and staying there.
Wow, good for him.
If
Is
he
there something else
please
you
mute
can
him and kick him out of the meeting.
He showed up in a couple of reviews and stuff. We told him to go away.
Good.
Okay, so let's skip that one. Go on to code organization.
Code organization DIMS.
Okay, I had like three things that wanted to touch base. So one was the random SHAs. We had a mega PR for that got merged. We still have about a dozen of them left, and we need to add a verify script to keep keep the number of dependencies to just those, and make sure we don't add to them. So then we removed 3 cloud providers, I think, deprecated ones for the last 2 years or 1.5 years, and that's gone. Then the third one, which I wanted to make sure that everybody here, chimes in also, was we have the end-to-end test and conformance testing teams. We're thinking about like how do you keep import aliases in sync, and can we use the same import aliases across some part of the code base. So we added an update and a verify script for that. But right now it's switched off, and people have especially the verify script doesn't actually run.
Did that change get merged?
Yes.
Go ahead, and I got a question.
Yeah. So right now there is an update script. If people run the update script, there's a subdirectory under test E2E which gets validated. There is a limited number of imports in a file with a specific alias that we actually make sure that are in sync. And there is a verify script which is disabled, so it doesn't run. When people want to add to it, people who are working on conformance, then what they do is they add a new alias, and then they run the update script, and then they run the verify script to make sure it has what they want, and then they'll open up the PR. The reason for adding this was there were at least 2 people who were working in this area who came up with the same idea around the same time, saying, it's hard to review stuff because the same alias can mean 2 different things when there are 2 different files. So that was the basic problem that we were trying to solve there. So Tim, go ahead.
I was going to ask why this is important. It felt like a lot of complicated code for what looked to me to be really little return on investment.
Right.
I definitely feel the sympathy for people who are reviewing large changes and have aliases all over the place. It wasn't clear to me that warranted this level of work.
Right, but the work is done now, so.
Well, no, the work is never done because we maintain it forever. And it's really fiddly AST code, right?
And it imposes a cost on others. Like anyone using the code base, it imposes a cost.
The update, the verify script doesn't run, so it doesn't add to it. It's just the people who are interested in that can run the scripts and, or choose not to run the script.
I would be, like, I felt like it would be more interesting as a GoLint sort of thing. At least within a package, you should use the same alias for all files within the same package. But having global preferred names seems like policy where we don't need it.
This runs only under test E2E. So any other files outside of test E2E are not touched or looked at.
Yep. Y'all can tell me it's a bad idea. I've heard it from so many people. The thinking was like explicit. So this is motivated because we discovered that the RBAC API that we were using in a number of conformance tests was actually the beta API and not the V1 API. And then when Jordan opened up the PR to migrate, he followed a convention that I noticed was in other places. And so then I thought, well, like, is that an actual convention or is it just a personal thing? And it looked like it was really, most of test E2E was close to following that convention. Not all of it, though. The entirety of the KK code base is complete in other entropy. And so I thought, would it ease review burden on people for conformance if we were really explicit about the versions used?
So Clayton's responding, and we leave it as an experiment. I'm fine with it since it's done, and I don't actually have to deal with it. So my personal investment is low, but I am fine with leaving it in the test E2E space where I do think consistency probably matters. I think the real value of this, though, would be in a GoLint test that would actually benefit the entire code base, right? We know we already have a bunch of things that fail GoLint. This would be one more reason to fail GoLint. But I think that would actually be like the real win would be consistency within packages.
So one interesting option here is like, you know, can we make this more usable outside of Kubernetes that like hints at the Go lint type of thing? One of the things that I think is interesting is that there's a settings file that's associated with this. Could we do something where it's like a file that applies to a package and all the sub packages under that thing, and so that this thing is not like a special named file, but it actually is sort of checked in closer to the code where it applies? This feels very non-Go, but I feel like we're kind of a little bit off.
Yeah, if y'all are interested in iterating on this, we can do that. But we did reach the conclusion that like this is an experiment. A human who cares about being really fiddly or consistent can run this and then try to have fun landing their PR. So I have a 47 commit PR that touches a couple thousand lines that uses this tool to do that. And if it never gets in, I guess it never gets in, and that's my bad.
You know, if the people who are spending the most time looking at EDE find it useful to occasionally run this and get back to convention, I don't really have a problem with it. I would say if the maintenance of this program itself becomes a problem, then we should reconsider.
The meta question here, which I feel like we dance around, which is we've never actually documented the code conventions for Kubernetes and its ecosystem projects in a consistent way. When I review, I have a very opinionated stance that I don't always enforce on everyone, but sometimes I'll say like, you know, you should go do this. Why? Because I told you so. That's not necessarily the best thing. I do think the people who are most, like a lot of the people who are responding to this are people who probably should participate in trying to get like a 20 or 30 line, here's our conventions. And
yeah, there is a document, but we haven't updated it since like 2014.
And I doubt
I looked. I couldn't find a document that talked about conventions for imports. And there's just one other quick thing. Like the last time this discussion happened, since you're talking about the broader ecosystem, people are like, why not Go imports? Like this is kind of why Go imports is super opinionated and doesn't have settings. It's like, look, the alias you get is the last name of the package. That's it, full stop. And we're like, what if we modified that? Go imports turns out to be really slow. This turns out to be really fast. Like really
Go imports, like just like we have problems that Go, like this is the tension of, we have learned things over the years, and you're right, Aaron, that there's things that we need that are just a little bit further. You're right that it should be documented in a place that everybody can find it and every reviewer should be able to point to it. And we should, like this discussion belongs as a PR to that should exist before we have to do that PR, because we never like I know people on this call went through the code base when we were rolling out groups and versions and got really consistent about it. And then it never went out to anybody else. So we kind of missed an opportunity to communicate versus just doing code.
Okay, so we are okay with continuing on and revisit in 6 months. If I have to touch it one more time, then I'm going to say, okay, that'll be an PR to remove the whole thing.
Right. I will just say with the caveat that if we want to expand the scope of this beyond test E to E, that we need to have a different conversation.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
All right, then we've got what, one more conformance?
One more quick, Matt, just while we're here talking about it, which sub-project should own coding conventions? Code organization? API conventions?
Code organization.
Code organization.
Code organization seems fine with me.
Okay.
Good to me.
Yes, more work, Dims.
Oh, man.
It's easier to hand it to the person who's here, too, since Jordan skipped out.
Yeah, you made the change. You own it now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Conformance.
So I'll keep this short because we're running low on time. We did kind of like a meta planning session for 116. Like this is the first time the conformance group actually did like what are the priorities that we want to commit to for a given cycle. The priorities are listed there in the doc. P0, one of the things we think are the highest priority items that we want to address. is John's proposal for enumerating the tooling, basically using API machinery to auto-generate some metadata that we can use for both inspection as well as evaluation for future conformance tests. P1 was Claudio's and John Schnocke's work with regards to image deduplication. For those who are not familiar with, there's over 70 different images in the end-to-end test suite, and we're deduping those slowly but surely, in part because of the Windows effort. So this will help to make our images more agnostic to platform, and there are less of them, so that'll be good. There are some thorns at our side currently, though, because there are some specialty images that exist. I don't know if it's possible to boot that stuff out, but we'll try to address those and maybe come back to this group to talk about those. GPU is a thorn. Also, last but not least, we're going to go through our existing backlog of current upgrade tests that we want to promote from existing end-to-end suite tests to conformance, as well as evaluate the umbrella issues that HIPAA has created for us. Last but not least, we want to start to create a better criteria for evaluation for priorities for the tests we want to promote, and start to document some of the things that we're doing to make it a little bit clearer for the future. So that's our current plan, as the people have agreed to. So let it be written in stone. You can hold us to our feet to the fire to see what we can accomplish in 116. And for those who are interested, we are going to go through and groom the backlog in all its gory detail this afternoon. So if you're interested, I think it's like 2 p.m. Pacific time. Is that correct, Aaron? Yeah, using the same URL for conformance.
Yes, 2 p.m.
Great. That's it.
Fantastic. And we have 4 minutes left. Look at that. Did anyone have anything, open discussion for the final 4 minutes, they wanted to throw on the fire? I'll take silence as accepted. Everyone probably gets like 3.5 minutes back. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Happy Thursday.
Thanks all.